Alright, we're getting started on this cold day with the Orgoth Deathless figure. It's a really cool sculpt. It's pretty big in comparison to normal like 28s and stuff. You can see that he's a little bit of a giant here, like 9 foot tall. We're gonna start with non-metallic gold, get that locked in. So this is Mr. Swinson's recipe for the Orgoth gold. So we start with English uniform, we have black to mix in, Japan uniform, German yellow, and then I'm using Minoth white highlight. So there's a few modifications to what his recipe is, just to build up. And I usually use plague brown for a lot of my golds, so that has a lot more yellow in it. I'm going to go ahead and do up a couple areas, and then we'll talk about application of the non-metallic gold for this model. Alright, so we're back. We have a leg all nice and shiny. I'll walk you through kind of the steps or process. As always, start with the black, and then we've got about a 50-50 mix of English uniform and the black. That's like our sketch phase, so that's where we want to make sure that we're laying in where our further highlights are going to be. I'm going to demonstrate here in a second. So that's this color, so half step here, then pure uniform, or the English uniform, our brown, then a 50-50 mix of uniform, Japan uniform, and our English uniform, then pure Japan uniform, then back to a mix of Japan uniform and German yellow, so covering a lot of the nations around the world. I should have got some like French ivory or something. Then straight Japan uniform, and then I avoided the mix because the areas are so small of Japan uniform. If you're going for like a larger transfer of color, highlights for this, getting pretty small, especially with such a packed area of detail. You might want to do a mix to avoid, like you got a blade or something, a longer stretch. But I just went straight to the Minoth white highlight for our ivory, or our like bright white points of light. Now, let me get my phone to focus. Let's look at, I'm going to try to, there's no simple areas to really look at on this. And I'm going to go kind of right here on this shoulder pad. So black and our German uniform, 50-50 mix. I'll come in here, and again, this is like our sketch phase. I'm not worried about knocking out shadow, like, or the black shadow too much, because this is a fine shadow color for it. I'm going to increase this curve as it comes around. And got my bounce over here, and the bottom lighting, and then the same thing right here kind of comes up. So pretty much that whole top area, right? Grab the wrong color there. I'm going to increase this curve out even more, since it is still pretty dark and shadowed. And then I'm going to add like little reminder lines, so like bottom reflections that are coming in here. And you can see how the light's kind of naturally hitting areas. You can use that as kind of a cheater, because the light source from this way, from this guy, a lot of the previous privateer models coming over from this side. I like my characters kind of facing into the light, so like my paint job's kind of facing in the light. So again, just we'll sketch out. I'll go ahead and record a little longer segment of me sort of sketching out where these light sources are. And you can always go back and add black. Like, black's the best eraser, right? Especially some of these eyeballs and stuff. I'm going to go ahead and just fill this area in. Sometimes you paint something carefully and you're like, instead of keeping it, like, get rid of that pride. You know that area should be brighter, because that's like forefront shoulder coming right at you. And here, following those edges. Not super concerned about edge highlighting right now, because I'm just not. Edge highlighting, I think, right here, or the Japan uniform before it. That's about where I wanted to be. That near automata. Promise I'm not a weeb. My fiance is. Going in for these sort of bounce lights, keeping a lot more black and kind of highlighting opposite. Yeah, I'll do a small area for the gold demonstration. Again, remembering you can knock out your black and then just go back and add it in if you want to. So let's look at this area with the kind of ribbed pattern here. Still not concerned with filling in these areas too much. You can see here they've been filled in and they're still dark. Like you can still see that pattern, just because light is naturally going to hit into recesses anyway. So it's okay to fill in those recesses. It's not going to be like a perfect black shadow down there. Trying to make a decision on whether or not I want this to be a really hard breaking light or like a soft one, like it's round. Kind of leaning into the harder break. I don't know if I got like ice chunks in my paint or what. It's cold. The studio is cold. And again, following my sketch, just going inside of that sketch. I'm gonna add some water. I need to add some warm water to this paint. Keep it from freezing on me. I'm gonna go all the way up on this band. Maybe concentrate kind of on the center of it. You can see right now you should be leathery. And you will be until you get to the pure Japanese uniform. It's one of those recipes. It's like you don't do it for a while and all of a sudden you're like, is this right? Am I doing this right? It doesn't look right. And now we'll start doing kind of individual blocks here. Again, inside our previous layers. Depending on how fast you want to paint this, you can take out the intermediate steps if you want. I like to be fairly blendy with my stuff. Jack it up to the pure Japanese uniform. Staying in our previous layer. Like I say, I'm starting to kind of pull a few edges, pulling like more of a contour of the shape. Go ahead and get the bottom of that little piece of battle damage. Pull some edges over here. And your edges can dip into your shadow area, that's fine. You don't have to stay within a layer for your edge if you have lines that run like this. Then a mix of our German yellow, Japanese uniform. Maybe add like a little bit down here, up here. It's a really thin band, so I did a like tiny bit of edge highlighting with it up here, and then some little kind of like nicks, because this is supposed to be a little older armor. Gonna have to weather it up at the end too. Will go back and touch this a little bit once I am done. I can't paint comfortably under the camera. That's a pretty good example for you guys. See, I might want to pull just a tiny edge across here, across the top, so I'm maintaining my gradient, but at the same time tracing the shape. So we're on pure, right? Yeah. Starting to get there, and then just that pure Minoth jump in the middle there, and just blend it, so like a little highlight there, and then an edge highlight that doesn't run end to end. And kind of some really bright, this is the area that's catching a lot of the light, and you can pull the edges down a little bit too. Again, I'm probably going to adjust this just a little bit. I'll come back and explain what I did. I want more light here on that surface, and then maybe widen it down here with our midtones, mid to lights, and the face is going to be really bright. This surface is like right smack dab in the height. I want to draw attention to the face, so you want that real bright pop. I'm going to work on the rest of the gold, and when we get back, we'll start looking at some of the other non-metallic areas on the model. Alright, we've finished up our gold. I did adjust the example shoulder pad that we were working on. Recipe's the same, but I did want to brighten it up even more since it's that high point, and I want to draw attention to this is like the angle that I'm looking to photograph the model at, and so this really bright reflection here. That being said, we're going back with the airbrush later to adjust some of the tones and adding that kind of weathered element. So some things will get darker, but they'll get darker in relation to each other. So meaning that the brights will still be the brightest brights on the model after we add those kind of filters to it. It's kind of explaining light source here. Going for, you can see the gold kind of clipping over the shoulder here, going for that sort of, he's almost looking into the light, so he's catching a lot on this leg, a lot on this upper. It's still a downward light source, so these areas are in shadow. This part of the leg Still brighter again because looking at that light coming in and hitting directly here, and actually kind of shaded over on this side because just out of the light source. Same here with the glove, looking at this angle, catching a lot here. This shoulder pad definitely not as bright on this side, and then here a strong catch of light in this section, and then pretty dark back in here behind the head. We're going to be moving on to the non-metallics for the iron here in a second, and I got the recipe ready for that. But look at these faces too, keeping them a little bit bright so they're readable. This one realistically would be pretty dark, but I wanted the readability of that object to be high. Same here and here. This might need to brighten up a little bit in comparison to the shoulder pad, but I still think like the angle that it's at, it's catching a lot of light just right here on the side. So that is my theory behind the lighting on this. Alright, our non-metallic iron. A lot of colors, a lot less mixes. You still could do this with mixes, but starting with coal black, the German TKCR black, so like kind of a brown gray. That's this one here. The gray green, so just a step up from that to that, so these are just straight progressions. And then when we get to the blue gray pale, we mix the gray green and the blue gray pale because of how drastic of a step up it is. And then just directly to sky gray from our pure blue gray pale. So after your mix, you do pure, then the sky gray, and then a final highlight, warm highlight of our Menoth white highlight. Same thing that we use for our gold to give you that kind of bright, warm highlight there. Alright, let's paint one of these up. We're starting with our TKCR black, which is kind of our brown, black, gray color. Come in here, sketch out where our light is going to be. Again, this is kind of leaving a little bit of black in this little crevice here, wrapping around the sides, making sure we don't miss the underneaths. And then the little hangers, treating those kind of like cylinders, like little wires that are hanging the armor on. Coming around, making sure we get all sides. Alright, then just a straight step up to that gray-green from model color. And just going inside our previous and maintaining edge highlights. I'll highlight the top edge of this crease as well here, because I kind of want that little reminder that I need that light that's going to be hitting that area. Coming around, not covering up my previous layer completely. Mixing up a 50-50 of the gray green and the blue gray pale here, just to smooth out the transition of those two colors. This should be pretty bright, so I might even cover up my previous layer on this bottom area. Again, adjusting as you're going up and then thinking about light while you're doing it is important, just like I did on that shoulder pad. And then less light on this upper area because it's deeper in, closer to the body, so I want it to be darker. And then edge highlighting our shapes, making sure that they're readable, that they have depth. And then this up here, I didn't hit it with the previous layer just because this is so thin. You can almost skip steps with it, but just top and bottom. So you have a highlight where it goes in to the object, and then a highlight where it comes out of the little mouths there. Still on our pure gray pale here, just adjusting, adding little steps. And then I want to hit this hole, highlight it so it looks like it has that sort of ring entry where the loop comes through the object. Now we're going straight to our sky gray here. And this is where we get like a little bit dotty. Less of a brush stroke and more of a kind of a stipple motion for our highlights, just to make the material look a little more weathered with its highlights. That texture makes it feel old and pitted. You can see just kind of little agitations of the brush there. Same thing on this highlight. Even though it's a consistent shape, I want to dot it. And then with our ivory, so our Menoth white highlight is our ivory color. And going in, and you know, value wise, like on the palette, these two might look kind of the same as far as value, but that warmth pulls the ivory up a notch. You can see it's almost immediately get that kick of brightness from the warmth out of the ivory color. And again, sort of a dot, and then I'll finish out with like a brush stroke at the bottom. Dots gives it more of that weathered look. You can smooth it out if that's what you want to go for. But for this old guy, he probably crawled out of the mud like 2 hours ago, so he's gonna have that weathered look. We're gonna go back with some orange too and add some rust to that iron, naturalize it, some browns and some oranges. Alright, we've finished our non-metallic for the silver iron areas. Not really silver, it's more iron. And then I've gone in and added a filter over all of the non-metallic elements except for the axe, because it's going to be a little bit different, of skin wash. So skin wash flows the airbrush nice. Reduced it probably 2 to 1 with airbrush thinner, so 2 parts airbrush thinner to make it flow real nice. I did not do that on camera because I did not want to mess that up after 2 days of non-metallic metal. But you can see here kind of the darker reflections taking place. Still want to go in and add some weathering, but at this point, like seeing those nice reds pop in and accent the iron elements makes me happy. So a little look at some of the iron elements, of course brighter on the apexes of areas, a little bit muted here. Here you can see some of the airbrush in and amongst the helmet, giving it that old weathered look. A lot of stippling, a lot of sort of random brush strokes in a controlled fashion, if that makes sense. And again, thinking about volumes and shadow, have a strong shadow under the horn here, and not much light getting back over in this area. We got this breastplate down in here, all the way up down in there, the ring around the bottom of the axe, and of course accenting the plate at the bottom to make it look like it's divoted like a lot of these objects do. Each object has like a little bend in the middle of it, which I thought was pretty interesting. And sometimes the bend, like travels across. Pretty cool. Probably going to address the wraps next. So all these little wraps in here. So I'm going to think about a start. Probably start with a darker green or a desaturated green, just to accent everything else that's really going on in the model. Extra dark green. I think that'll make for an interesting come up with color. Sorry for the thought process flow. I didn't want to do this red after I'd done any other elements, because I didn't want that red to interact with any other elements, if that makes sense. This green going in to sort of show age, right? Also going to have green in the brass, gold, the red metal areas, and having green as an undertone or a strong undertone in the dark areas of the wraps, shadows and such. Will be a nice accent. So I'm going to finish up like one leg area, and then again demonstrate, show you probably up on this area what my process is. And then you guys can follow along at home, hopefully. Alright, let's look at how we got from this to this for our highlight and for our patterning and coloration on the leg. Let's look at the axe handle here. So I'm taking my dark green, extra dark green, because it's so extra, and khaki, trust me, it is khaki, from Reaper, and we're creating our gradient or value scale in those colors on the handle here. Man, I could barely get to anywhere on my palette. I had a lesson the other night on skin tones. So I'm using the khaki to bring up the green. The green, pigment-wise, is much stronger than the khaki. The khaki's really only affecting the value. It's not really affecting the saturation or the tone. So I addressed that by adding a wash after the fact. So I'm following my highlighting pattern for the axe here. Sorry, I did that completely off camera. A new day, I gotta get used to where I put the model on the screen. So just creating value scale. Worried very little about color. I still want to be using the right colors, the colors that I want it to be. But thinking ahead as far as like what I'm going to do in the process. And again, sometimes I do these paint jobs or these paint steps, and I'm using my experience to come up with how to get there. I don't want to force anybody to watch my thought process, but I can at least describe it for you. That I don't always have the immediate answer. Like I did these two colors thinking it's like, yeah, I'll just gradient up this, it'll be fine. And then, yeah, maybe I want to shift a little bit, right? Which this tone, a lot more natural for a wrap, even though you got the green shadow. It's not like this sort of green, which is like a very washed out light green. We're just following the contours of the wrap, and again keeping our cylindrical highlight in mind while doing so. And when I get to this point, I'll go one step higher. So I've done 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. Actually, 1, 2, 3 steps. I'm not keeping track. I'm talking, I'm not keeping track. So we go almost to a pure khaki. Bring that value way up. Alright, now I'm going to paint the other side real quick, and I'll show you the next step. Seraphim Sepia. Now this bottle, it's drying glossy. That's okay. We can fix that with some of the Lamia medium just to matte it back out. The sepia, and just do a nice healthy coat over this to naturalize the tones that we have here. It brings that shadow back in, brings that brownness that I wanted to have. So that green brown instead of just green. This is one of those steps where it's like, what can I do? I'm going to do a glaze, do something else. I also have some ink to add some darker shadows in there. Darker browns. Now of course this is going to have to dry. So I'm going to get all the other areas up to this step, and we'll come back and look at what I did. Alright, wash is dry. Let's take a look at adding some more naturalization to get this look to our straps instead of this. You can also see it's shiny. Again, Lamia medium. Works great over the brush. So, in order to take a pigment and desaturate it, we need another strong pigment around the same value tone. Our Earth from Game Color is the strong pigment that I want. I want to naturalize this green just a little bit. So I'm going to add this dark green and this earth tone. It has a little dry bubble on it, and you can immediately see the saturation levels change, as opposed to what we had with our khaki. So now we have a good base color to work up from with our khaki. So I want to add mid-tone, so I want to bring this up a little bit. You can immediately see the difference between saturation values and natural values in these colors. Hopefully you can immediately see it. I don't want to put words in your mouth. And then we'll come in and add another layer of highlights to get a nice, complex, rich base for our wraps. Kind of following along with what I did previously and hitting about the same highlight level with base coat. I'm going to work this up with a decent amount of layers. I go up not super high, but fairly high. So 2 steps up, 3 steps up from our base color. Again, seeing this where the highlight runs through the shaft of the weapon. We can leave that dark in there. I also have some smoky ink on my palette. Game color, smoky ink. I'm going to use that to add in shadow or color where I want. So I can go in underneath here. We have that darker brown that I added in with the airbrush. And I want to represent a little bit of that by hand. So bringing in a control element to adding it in. Pulling it through some elements here. Alright. And there we go. We're going to do that to all the straps. And keep in mind, I am going to do a coat of this afterwards. I'm not going to tape that because it's just clear. But I'm going to hit all the straps with that to just knock out any of these shines that we're seeing. You can see here, this is like super ultra matte. That's what that medium does for you. Alright, starting on our cloak, got the color that I want. Mixture of blackened brown and Chimera magenta. If you don't have access to Chimera, the Warlord purple from Vallejo also sort of works. It's a little bit brighter, so you might want to add more of the black and brown to it. Taking this about a 50-50 mix. I'm knocking the luster out of the color. I want more of an old magenta out of its prime. This guy's undead after all. It can still be a rich kind of royal color, but we're knocking it back. Still thinking about what I want to do with this like trim element that's here. Probably go with something a little bit brighter. Maybe like a white or a brown, or a white that's been browned. Or a brown that's been whited. I don't know. A mixture of those things. And then the massive amount of faces on the box. I'm going to go ahead and like hit those with the magenta and see what I think about that, because it goes with the Orgoth scheme. And I think the color really does set off the model really well. It plays with everything that's already here. We'll just have to see how it highlights up. Definitely going to be utilizing some airbrush and some wash on this giant face ghillie suit that he's wearing. Just kind of tickling my brush in there to get that base coat on. We don't have much to do after that. Some horns, face, fur. Saving the axe for last. Do some fun green, glowy stuff. But I'm going to continue to base coat these faces and get this in. It's so hard with the texture. And then we'll be back. Alright, settled on the recipe that I want for my mahogany. A little bit more washed out than the, it's not really mahogany, magenta mahogany. It's in between those two. A little more washed out, using the ivory as our value increaser. And we add just a touch more brown before we start bringing it up to wash out that burgundy feel. So that's the color that's between mahogany and magenta. It's burgundy. So I'll take my value increaser, my ivory here, and you can see it's still pretty brown. I added a little bit more brown to this mix, and then come in. I'm going to sketch out an area. Again, might refine it a little bit later off camera. I want to make sure you guys kind of see the process as it happens. Now with the faces on the back, I'm going to airbrush those because there's too many surfaces to really do justice with a brush right off the bat. I'm definitely going to add some highlights and stuff. I might wash out the bottom too. I also want to dirty up the bottom of the cape as well. Again, might do that with the airbrush, might do it with brush, might do it with pastels. Not sure yet. Still thinking. It's okay to think. Don't have to automatically know. And if you try something you don't like it, and paint over it. And that value change definitely needs to be fairly, maybe keep the brightness in here. I think it does need like a little bit of brightness in here just to kind of frame the model a little bit more. Like you have a big area of shadow and then you hit a bright spot back in here. It'll look good from this angle too, to have that shape bright in there. Thinking ahead to how the model's going to be photographed. You know, the privateer guys, they want that one good photo. I like to take like at least 8, have a nice little wraparound of the figure. That way I can prove to everybody the back of the model is also painted. And keep bringing it up. You can tell I paint in a certain method with all these little trails of color though. Like painting in layers. I'm just concentrating on this plane here. I'm getting some edges, a little bit of edge. He's not an edge lord, but he's a undead lord of some kind. Yep, it's definitely the color I want to use. Okay, I'm probably going to smooth this out a little bit. I hate seeing lines. It's like a pet peeve of mine. I like to go around and kind of smooth everything out. But, yep, that's the recipe. So, I'll get back to you when we do the airbrush on the back. Alright, I've mixed up a blend for our cape here. Just to blend out like the brush strokes and stuff that you see here. If you like the texture, go ahead, keep it. I like to, again, I'm OCD about blending. Take your magenta, your black and brown, there you go, and the Minoth white highlight. I mixed in a cup instead of the airbrush, get my consistency right with the colors, and then my color right as well. I want to make sure nothing's kind of stuck down in the beginning of the airbrush when I first drop colors in, so I don't get any like pure color coming out. You might see other YouTubers like Mr. Geraldez do his in a like a blister. I think Aaron, when he came to visit us, left a crap ton of these little measuring cups, so I get to be fancy. So spraying pretty good, spraying pretty thin. I might thin it out a little bit more. I don't want to be in coverage mode. Just in blend mode. And you can see just a little bit right there. Working it in there with tiny, tiny little agitations of the trigger so that I don't blow anything out. Try to get my hand in here so you can kind of see what I'm doing with my finger. Clear my nozzle a little bit, because it will stop up like as you're doing this, if you're not letting a lot of paint flow through. Seems like I'm pretty thin. I'm going to stay this thin. And I'm just going to work this color in here and blend this out. You can already see it's a lot softer. See a lot less brush strokes. See right here? This is what this was looking like before. So I'll finish up off screen because you don't need to see 20 minutes of me airbrushing. Alright, after that highlight, I'm going to take a little bit of this pale flesh because we're in that color zone with our final highlight on the cape. I've thinned this down. This is a Game Air color. I've thinned it down 2 to 1 with thinner to paint so that it goes on real light and real thin. So I got that extra control. And we're just blending in those little extra highlights. Getting that washed out fabric look. So a little bit brighter. And just a tiny bit down there. That gives me that same tone here and here. Yeah, and then we're going to add dirt down at the bottom. And I want to hit this one spot here on the cape just to accentuate those faces a little bit more. And again, get kind of that washed out, aged look. We're not going for like super colorful. We're going for dull, and dull can still be bright. Get the edges of the cape. Even though we're going to hit these with a little bit of dirt, that brightness will show through a little bit, show that it's catching a little bit of light. Yeah, like that, because you can see the faces really well now with that extra highlight. And this frames him pretty well as well. Cool, we still got to add shadows too, so not worried about brightness. Alright, so now I'm grabbing some of this burnt umber FW ink. It was either that or take some of the smoky ink. Smoky ink might have a little bit more red. I wanted to keep it just a touch down, be more dirt. And burnt umber still has a red tone to it. It's just, you can see a little more on the neutral side than a smoky or a skin wash ink. I'm gonna go ahead and add some dirt at the end of this cloak here. Naturalize it. So I'm fading it in here. It's a Friday at Low Mill. Getting busy. Naturalize this side a little bit. We can go even more saturated on these little tips, like they've been drugged through the dirt real nice. A lot. Fade it out a little bit. Alright, cool. That's a nice fade. You're going to have to add a little bit of detail, some brush strokes in here, just to have some hard lines. Alright, now I'm going to take my black and brown, parasite brown, get an even mix of those colors, get a nice orangey base for the fur color here. So this black and brown over here has got a lot of magenta kind of still soaked into it, so use this parasite. Knock knock, any paint home? Get my brush away. You see how it livens it up. It's not like super orangey. And then we'll increase value not by adding more of this orange brown, but just going straight from this orange brown. And that matches sort of that red tone that we're going for. So I'm going to finish this base coat and then show you how to highlight it up. Alright, base coat finished. I put one coat of highlight on, adding our Minoth white highlight to our original mixture, and so you've got this color just pushing its way in. I didn't mean to connect those pools of paint, and now it's got this little river going. With this first highlight layer, you can be a little rough and tumble with it. I'm not really going for individual hairs. Again, thinking about how light will go through a if it's intense enough, it'll knock out shadows. And then as we get farther away from our light source, then you think about more individual highlights with the hairs. So moving down here, it's almost like a wet dry brush, right? So just using kind of the side of your brush to make sure you're picking up and you're still leaving some of your base colors, but in here it's really heavy with it. And then we'll continue to mix up using this. I might switch over to tan or khaki. So let me shake. I got some here I can use. Let's add a little bit. It's kind of dry. Just to naturalize it like one part further. I go high up on the shoulder here. And you can always highlight with like clusters of highlights, so like the more highlights you put in an area will give you a brighter feel for that area. Heck, you can just dry brush it if you want to. I'm not dry brushing here, I'm being a little more fastidious with it. And I'll move this up a few highlights. I went back and I want to address this. So sometimes when you airbrush, you get stuff where you want it, sometimes where you don't want it. I added some black back in a couple areas just for object separation, like through here, and then naturalize my highlights a little bit. I like the fact that the purple's reflecting off of that. Not so much back here, so I went back in and added my high highlights, and then on the steel back here, gotten a little bit of that purple highlight right on the tips of these, and I went and knocked that back out. I added a little bit of darks here on these little panels just to show that it is reflecting, but it's also like not that, and also a dark line in between these two objects instead of having that shadow completely knocked out. These reflections to me look fairly natural, pretty good, so I'm going to keep them in there as far as that color. Happy accidents sometimes are a good thing. So you can see like a little bit of purple at the ends of these. I like that because they're close to these areas. It might behoove me to go back and do a little bit of airbrush of purple on here, but that's a little fastidious, and again our view angle is more at this angle, so I won't see as much purple when it comes to in photography, and I have to keep time in mind with these, but I just wanted to point it out to you guys in case you wanted to do that. After I get my fur highlighted all the way up to a pure khaki, as you can see here, we got pretty bright. I'm going back and dropping in some shadows in some of the deeper areas with Gox Sewer. I think that's how you say that. I know that's how you say sewer. I thinned it down a little bit with a Lamia medium just to knock down the shine that some of the contrasts have. I might need another coat of that. I have it mixed up here on my palette, and I'm just knocking in a few more shadows on the backside of his helmet here. So being very sparing with this, I'm not like doing an overall contrast coat. I'm using it as a color that's gonna not affect my highlights starkly. Like if I just took a dark paint and put it over it, then I'd have to layer my highlights back up. I want that transition to show through, which is what contrasts are good for. So you can see here we got some nice solid shadows coming in these layers of fur. Alright, our base skin tone is our extra dark green, somber gray, and black and brown. So to give you kind of a dark blue-green gray skin tone. You can see it here. Going for that really, really undead look. We'll naturalize it a little bit by adding some flesh tone to that color, just to bring it up, give them a little bit of redness here and there, pinkness. But I'm just going to get these base coats on, get them dry, and then highlight one area, and then demonstrate for you guys. Alright, I'm taking this base green gray that we did for our skin tone, adding a little bit of black to it to establish some shadows. I want to go just a little bit darker here just to pop our value down. You can see the face is fully finished except for the green glow. I wanted to go over that with you guys. With the shadows, I'm going to go in between the fingers here, bottom of the hand, anywhere there would be a strong shadow, just to reinforce these shapes before we go in and add our highlights. Trace around objects too, where they touch each other, so where that one thumb is coming over the other hand, I want to make sure I drop some shadows under that thumb. And then try and get in here. It's okay if you cover up a little bit. We're going to go back and re-highlight, of course. So our highlight or our additive color for our base skin tone is light flesh. Not super saturated, gives you a little bit of that fleshy look, has a little bit of that pink tone to it, but mainly just a value increase, kind of like how we use our ivory to bring things up. It's ivory is warm, so we're using that warm color to bring objects up in value, treating them like sunlight. Don't go very high with this. I think here, never to this pure color. Always adding it to the gray so it desaturates it a little bit. The back side of the hand here again. Think of how your shadows might get knocked out almost completely. So we'll paint over that, and then we'll leave this one down here at the bottom where the pinky joint. Alright, so we've got one layer of this highlight on. We're going to continue to add progressive layers of that flesh mixed in with our base flesh. Definitely want to point out that I'm not adding this to the shadow, the one where I added the black, because that has already desaturated our paint, and if we bring it back up, we'll lose a little bit of that blue, green, gray that we want to have for this old zombie desiccated skin. Picking out knuckles still. We'll go back and we'll get fingernails, like I got his teeth here. That's you can tell just a little bit how they're warmer. It's because I'm using the khaki and where is it? The ivory. Again, that ivory being a very warm highlight. Back of the hand here. I'm not going to pull these highlights up too much because there's not a lot of light on that section, but there is here where you can see the gold's getting a lot of light. Again, adding some more flesh. That's about our end all for the highlight. So I'll pick out a few of these knuckles, pull it along the edge of the finger here, Same right there. Get a couple of these top ones, and then focus the highlight on the ball of the thumb on this side. We got that good value shift there. Now we can see the fingers really well. All right, gonna do the fingernails. Fingernails, same as the teeth. A little bit of this khaki, a little bit of this ivory. Add a pinch of water. Rehydrate them. Really just need, well, no, we can see some of the bottom fingernails. And there. Right there. And there's another one down in there. I'm not going to do that one on camera.
I watched the shop what you did about.
Taking some of our cold yellow here from Chimera. We still have some on the palette. And we're going to do our eyes. So we got a very yellowy green that the eyes are going to be. Kind of like glowing from the inside. So we're doing kind of like a pre-coat. That yellow will really, really punch our green. Painting eyes on the camera, always risky. Come in and highlight underneath the eyelid, underneath the eyebrow, and then bottom of the eye here. And a line, you can leave kind of a shadow so it feels like the light's coming out and catching edges. Then underneath here. I'll let that dry a second. Alright, fluo green. That's going to go over our yellow. You can see I went in and reworked didn't rework, but just added more layers to the yellow in the eye sockets. It's hard to see with the phone right in front of my right in front of my face. So I'm going in, and I'm going to add the green on the outside first, and then work it in to the yellow in the center. I'll, ideally want to leave a little bit of the yellow in the center of the eye for that brightness. Don't have to. The fluo greens are really, really thin, so you will need lots and lots of layers of this. It makes for a nice... it photographs really well too. It gets a iridescent glow. So I'm going to add a bunch of layers to this over time and then get back. Alright, moving on to the axe handle here. Did a nice mediocre coat of earth here. Just a good middling color. I'm going to take that same contrast that I stole off our shelves here at the shop, that we did the fur with, and just do an all-over coat with that. I want to put some verdigris and some grime and stuff in the handle, so I want to darken it up a little bit to bring out the texture that's there. So getting this sewer color on there, which is perfect as far as the darkness goes. I'm just going to do a quick coat of that, let it dry, and be back. Alright, once your, whatever that sewer wash is called, is dry, we're going to go in and add some really small striations on the handle using the same color we did for our base coat, the earth from Game Color. So just coming in, like you have a big area like this, if you can, try to add 2 stripes, pieces of grain. This, it coats pretty lightly, so it will blend well. So you go in, put like really faint mark, and then, alternate the intensity as it like comes down the handle. And that'll give you a nice wood grain base to go from. And then we'll highlight this up a little bit. That means you have to put the wood grain on, and then you have to replicate the wood grain by putting a highlight on it. Alright, now that we got our wood grain on the handle here, we're going to take some of this earth, add some khaki, just to bring our value up. We're going to add some highlights into our light source. So really concentrating kind of right here near the face where all that interest is. Bringing those up just a little bit more. Those striations really make that handle feel old. That old wood. Maybe a little bit more on the top. This isn't like a huge or a long step. I think it has a lot of impact, but because if it didn't, I wouldn't be doing it. It really pulls that wood grain out. Couple little dots down in here just to show that there's still some wood grain. We're gonna attempt to get maybe a few, in between those metal bands. On the back side, I'm gonna leave it alone completely because those are too pinched together. All right. Besides weathering, call that done. Look at the horns next. All right. Taking a look at the horns. Base coat, I took our black and brown, added some flat red to it, about a 50-50 mix, so you get a really rich dark burgundy with that. And from there, adding earth brown up until we get to a pure earth brown highlight, and then adding khaki to our earth brown until we get to a pure khaki highlight. Reason being, here's the colors for you. So this mix with the earth added to it, and then this, once you get to the pure, add the khaki till you get to the pure khaki. Same sort of steps as we used for the wood grain, just more of them. Keep in mind light and shadow, so the highest highlights are going to be here, since our light source is this way, and then the highest highlights on the other horn are going to be over here. So you can see here I've added a ton of texture to this horn. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and paint up the other one because this is a really long and detailed process, almost like painting eyeballs with these little bitty lines that have been put in. A lot of those are added, so you see how this one has a really wide section, and then this one's divided into two little sections here. If you can't do that, again, it's okay to highlight around. You can do volumetric highlights if you want, but I really like to add that added texture to a figure. Something that was bothering me a little bit was just just the fade of the cloak. So I wanted to add a little bit more detail to it. This is one of those textures where it's like, do I dry brush this? Do I don't? Decided to go ahead and dry brush to add a little bit of that extra detail, a little bit of extra fade to the cloak as well. So got out a brand new dry brush. I hate using old dry brushes, and they're hard to keep clean. So I took our mixture for the cloak, which was the mahogany with the brown to mute it out, and then brought it up with our ivory. Loaded and did kind of a wet load instead of drying it off on the paper towel, so the paint would come off a little more evenly, and then hit these areas. Got a pretty decent fade. I was going in and hand highlighting everything just as a test. It's like, God, this is going to take the rest of the day, and I need to finish this today. So did dry brush a little bit here. You can see kind of that edge got picked up. A few edges in here got picked up. Just a tiny bit here and in here. And through the dirt a little bit just to naturalize it, bring a little bit of that color back into the brown areas. Speaking of which, I might go in here just to illustrate. See how the paint acts like almost like a cream, and this is just finicky persnickety You see my highlights tint down just a little bit. I get a little bit of that color back in. You can see there's like barely any sort of pigment on the brush at all. Just adding back a little bit of that color into the brown so it has kind of a fade in and fade out where the tops of those faces are. I think, oh, this little tabard ring. I got to make a choice on that, and that's going to be a browned out gray. So I'm going to take my pale gray blue. Take some of this brown. And then we'll do a base coat of this color. You can see where the dry brush hit some of the higher edges on this too. That black and brown is in so many of our colors that kind of pulls itself into. I think that looks good, so I'm gonna get a base coat done and talk you through the rest. All right, black and brown with the blue gray. I'm just gonna add more blue gray to it. I'm gonna keep it subtle. It's cloth. You don't need to go overboard. And drop in some highlights, some edges. In there. Maybe a little bit of this corner catching some light. Give a brush lick. Blend it out just a little bit. Again, I don't think this has to be too striking. Definitely want like a clean divide here.
Down here, so you get the crates and the
And I think that'd be it for that. Stands out with it. That blue gray looks good against the red. Alright, fun part. Let's take a look at the non-metallic on the axe blade. Inside's going to be green. You're going to have that trapped soul look. But I want to get this locked in first. Axes are so fun because there's so many little glints and glares that you can put on there. Recipe starting with our coal black English uniform into our gray pale, sky gray, into our Minoth highlight, and then ending this one with a white. This will be the only white on the model, will be on the blade. I feel like that really intense punch of pure white, just the smallest amount on the blade really like gives that blade attention that it deserves, because you know that's the secondary star of the show. That green's really pulling in the look for like the whole model. It's like a central focal point because it's such a complement to every other color that's going on, and I want to see how it's going to balance out once we get in the axe. Alright, so quick demonstration of the scheme. Black plus your English uniform. This is your sketch phase. This is where you start going, okay, this is where I want my colors to be. So I'm going to go in. I'm just going to demonstrate on a flat area here. Keeping a lot of black in this axe. Not to look dangerous, especially on the flat. The blade has a lot more sharpness to it, so I want it to be more the focal point of that blade. And then have kind of a duller finish for the flat, but we'll take the top of the axe all the way up. Now once I have my black and my brown mixed, I add increments of this blue gray pale, and just build it up. Once I get to the pure blue gray, I start dotting a little bit more than doing my brush strokes. I keep the look still kind of scratchy, because I feel like the scratchy brush strokes or scrubby or feathery brush strokes, any of those descriptors help with the overall feel and look. Yeah, like those can jump out real lightly into areas to give that worn look. And edge highlighting as I go. And at some point, I'll jump straight to my blue-gray pale. Again, keeping that layer rough, right? I'm not going for a super smooth look on that layer. Let's jump straight to the blue-gray pale in here. So they're kind of like mixing between brushstroke and dotty, and then kind of dot along the top edge just to show a little bit of battle damage there. Then into here, we get really into these highlights. More dot matrixing, so it gives you that kind of wear pattern. Straight to the sky gray, giving us that blue. I'm just going to pull it to the front of the axe here, kind of like a little bit of an obtuse L. Then straight to that Minoth white highlight for our warmth. More dots. I might put a dot right over there on that side. Now that warmth just punches it. And then for our value punch, just a tiny dot white right there in the corner. You see, like when he's holding it, how the top of that color feeding into the model just pushes your eye into the model even more. So these are going to reinforce that. So cylindrical highlights on these two, just pointing right at the top of his head. Really good choice sculpt wise on that, to have the axe pointing at the actual character and the curve leading back in. Sorry, going a little bit into theory and like overall composition of the model, which is just good. I love this model. So again, gonna work on the axe in the same sense. Remember to keep your flat, which is a little bit amorphous with the faces in there. Remember to keep your flat darker than your blade edge. I'm gonna finish this out, and then, you know, if you want to stick around and listen to more diatribes about art theory, then cool. For the back of the axe, the faces, taking Lamium medium, our ultra matte medium, with some of our cold yellow. Same thing we did with the eyes, using that cold yellow to bring out our green. So a couple layers of this. This is the first layer. I want to go a little bit higher. Probably going to concentrate it to the middle a little bit. Maybe just leave it with the shapes. Using it like a wash, getting it fairly reduced. So if you want to see the effect when it goes on real shiny and then dries real matte. So almost like a wash, and it fills in. And then it takes a little bit to dry. So making sure that I'm filling in all the little cracks and crevices. I'll do one more layer on the back, see how that works. See how many of these we need to do before we get nice. Don't want coverage. I want that topography kind of called out for us. While that is drying, I'm going to take some of that English uniform and just use that for the base color of our base. I'm just going to slap that on there. Using a big synthetic, so I'm not worried about the wear and tear on it. Alright, I got 2 coats on the axe now. They're drying fairly quick. I'm going to take some Agrax Earthshade, finish up a wash step on the base. Just get it on there, slather it on nice and thick like. Just to add our shadow tones back in. And get the rest of the base. Time for fluo green. So I got my Lamium medium out again. I guess I'll just show you the label. There you go. Lamium. medium. I'm going to use my liner brush this time. Add some of your medium to your palette. Reduce it down. Get that nice fluo green that's chunky, nice and smooth. Fluo. And then this is, again, where control comes in with having a thinner paint. This paint's really thin. You can see, like, wherever I touch, it's not getting affected too much. Getting all these happy screaming trap souls nice and coated in there. And then I'm going to take my brush and pull a little bit of this out in some areas because I want it to build up a little bit slower. And go ahead and do the, I'm going to do the backside. I wonder if that gets you demonetized, saying things like that. Maybe? I don't know. How sensitive is that AI? Alright, we're going to do several coats of this, and then the base is kind of shiny from our Agrax, so I'm going to do a coat of the Lamia Mutant across that just to knock out that shine. Alright, these are taking a little bit to dry because they're such thick layers. You can see the Lamium starting to mat out areas, get that nice ultra matte. While that's drying, let's do a little bit of weathering to our armor. Brush Hawk from Cuttlefish Colors. Cuttlefish is a new line from... what is the line? Creature Caster. Alright, we're taking a look at adding the patina in here. I wanted to do a few demo areas just so you guys could see how faint that green dries in there. Probably one of the deepest areas is right here in this shadow. Treating it like, again, patina, like rust for brass objects. Thinning it down super, super heavy so we get that control in there, and then dropping it into cracks and crevices. Just wherever you think water would build up or damage would build up, that's where we're at. And it doesn't have to be super narrative. You can always go for what you think looks best. It's going to be way brighter. It's going to maintain those values that we put in. Again, we're just tinting things to make them look a little older. You know, like a brass handle you find has that nice green mold all over it. Hit down in here in the shadows. It's very, very, very faint glaze with the reducer. I don't know if I filmed this. I had left my camera on in the middle of the thing, but the Cuttlefish has its own medium. It works really well for reducing down the paints and keeping them from separating. We're going to thin down some of our green, put it in the airbrush so we can get a little bit of a natural glow across the axe. I want to maintain the blade though because it's shadowed from it. I want to see a little bit more green in here and on the handle, and then we might glaze in some green reflecting off the helmet, back of the helmet. Alright, now we're taking some of our fluo. We've reduced it down really, really heavily so you can see that it's barely affecting anywhere that I spray, and that's going to give me the control in this area. And you can see my finger, just real small agitations. It's one of those things where it's going to take a few minutes to paint this, to layer it up, because I don't want it to get too wet, and I just want to keep adding small translucent layers of paint to keep my shapes. So I'm going to keep doing that for a little bit, and I'll update you when I'm done. Just to show you guys the difference with the airbrushing make. So this is our first layer that we did with the brush, and then with the airbrush. So a little bit of green's getting on the blade, not totally upset with that, looks pretty good. And then again, the backside. So it takes a lot of little layers. Alright, lots of airbrush coats later, and we finally got a really kind of muted black green for our axe. And I added some of that Cuttlefish color that we use, that teal, into the handle for the wood to do some wood rot and to match it out. Now we're going to dry brush our base with the German RLM. So I'm taking a really old Series 7. I know, heart's breaking. Wiping it off, making sure my consistency's good. And then doing kind of my forward crescent, making sure that the majority of my highlights are toward the front of the base, just to call out the model, give you a viewpoint, and then a lot more sparse on the back. Being really, really careful when we get in here. Now I'm going to take some of my ivory, blend it just a little bit. Bring that into the front a little bit as well. Awesome. Alright. Cool. Next little bit that I want to do is add a little bit of rust to our iron elements. So I'm going to break out the orange and water it down, medium it down, so we can get some rust going. Alright, got my orange here from Chimera. It's heavy pigment, really does lend to doing rust with it really well. I like it. Like it for that. I'm going to take a little bit of water, take some medium over here from this side, thin it down. I want this really, 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 really runny. I want it to pool like water does, so that it look like the water caused rust. And then I want to unload my brush a little bit, so I don't want it to go everywhere. I want that control. And I'm going to add it just a tad in some areas. See, we already got some of that like red color from our airbrush, and we can play on that a little bit. Dirty these up. Remove how clean they are. Just a little bit here and there. Axe, definitely a good place to hit that in the rivets under there. Kind of doing it out of the light. And down in here.
I'm going to go through around in the connector.
Some of these rivets need a little attention. We got a lot of colors playing. I want to be faint. Faint, because I want to go too rainbowy. Do a little brush lick and sort of push some of this around. Real faint. Needs a little bit in the back of his helmet. Maybe one of the reasons to keep it wet is when it builds up like that. And just pull it back out. Put it in those little divots, creases. They're good spots for that. Some under here. Give a highlight in the low light area. And then adjust it by siphoning off just a little bit of that color. See it down in there. Alright, base. I've already trimmed up one of our tufts. Trim it down so we can see the model. Just using some scissors. This is the original height. So I'm taking a lot of the height off of that just so we can see the model better on the base. I'm going to glue these on, then we'll go over detailing that out. Alright, we got our tufts glued on. One of the things that's important when you trim these is to go back once you have it at the right height and differentiate the grass by coming in and like straight down cuts and just kind of trimming like they do with the feathering shears when you get your hair cut. I know maybe that only relates to the guys. I don't know what they do for girls when it comes to feathering stuff. Once this glue's dry, we're going to drop some shade down at the bases of the grass just to show that they're dropping a shadow. I was thinking about hitting it with a little bit of indigo to shadow it, but I'm pretty happy with the way we are right now. So I'm going to wait for this glue to dry and then show you the very final steps, because I think we're about done. Alright, I'm going to use some sepia to drop in our shadows here. Loading up with my liner brush. Liners are really good for washes. And just kind of poke in and around the base. Alright. Drop a little bit of a grass shadow. And then you can feather it out. I did a brush lick. That was dumb. I'm used to doing brush licks when I want to thin something out. Washes don't taste good. Yeah, still got a little bit of wet glue in there. Pick that off the end of this brush. This is synthetic, I don't care. I will risk it. Just showing up that, kicked up dirt around our bases. And then take a little bit of tan. Where's my khaki? Change my palette out so I can't just dip into old paints. Got my khaki. Load up my brush. This brush is fairly dry. I didn't wet it beforehand. And then just hit the tops here of the grass, just to show that they're dead. They're not a little dead. They're dead. Drying up and getting crusty. He's dead, grass is dead, dirt's dead. Maybe it's undead grass. Alright. Then we're ready to hit the base with our black. And you see I just went straight in with this brush. And if you watch my channel, you know this is the time that I say, hey guys, leave me some comments.
What are you doing?
Tell me what you think about the paint job, and ask me all those questions, because I do like answering questions, helping people out. I feel like there's a lack of that in the painting community. You get a lot of opinions, but not really help. It's like, I do this and da-da-da-da-da. It's like, well, okay. You don't want to do that. Well, cool. Tell me what I want to do. Give me some actual help. Show me what you're doing. I think that's another important aspect of this hobby. If somebody's telling you something, just look at what they've been doing. I've been seeing a lot of keyboard warriors lately. I want to keep things nice. Well, again, hope you enjoyed everything. We'll see you in the next video. And happy painting.